Hey everyone, welcome back. David in History for the Ages here. So I'm recording this right when the last pope had passed away, and it's time to pick a new pope. And a lot of people don't know the story of at one point you had three popes at the same time, and a lot of it was caused by this guy who was the king of France at the time. So let's go through this story. I think you'll really find it interesting. Remember, like, leave comments, share, subscribe, and please let people know about all my great lectures here. So this is what we sometimes call the Great Schism. There are other great schisms. A schism, of course, is a big split. And in the previous image, you saw an image of Philip IV. He was the king of France. And what had happened is in the early 1300s, a pope had died, and the College of the Cardinals needed to meet to pick a new pope. And Philip basically exerted his authority and influence to get this guy named Clement V to become a new pope. Now, at the time when all this was happening, Rome was very unstable. There was various factions, violence, chaos. There were threats to the papal safety even, and so Clement used this along with Philip as a way to maneuver the Pope to move away from Rome and live in a city called Avignon in France. So this is not the Great Schism. In Avignon, I know it's really small on the map here. Let me just kind of circle it here for you. So it's right over here in southern France. And of course, over here in Italy, you have, of course, where the Pope usually lives. Anyways, so at that point, the Pope lives in France, in Avignon, instead of Rome. And then you have like seven more popes basically living in France during what is sometimes called the Second Babylonian Captivity. Why is it called that? Well, because it lasts for about 75 years. And, if you know about the Babylonian captivity, that's when the Jews were held captive in Babylon for about 75 years until they were freed and were able to go back to their to Judea, Israel. And so the idea of the church not having the Pope in Rome for about 75 years is like the equivalent of the Jews not living in Jerusalem for that long. Anyways, so at that point, what happens? Eventually, we get to 1378, and Gregory the 11th, who was the Pope, says, "I'm moving back to Rome. That's where I belong." The problem is he moves back to Rome and then he dies the next year. So he hadn't had a chance to kind of reestablish the traditions of the popes living in Rome. Remember, we go through this so fast, especially in my classes. We cover hundreds of years, like in minutes sometimes. And so, if you think about it, yes, historically, the church has had the popes, the Catholic Church has had the popes live in Rome from forever, right? But if your lifetime and you've known about 70 years of the popes living in Avignon, then when the College of the Cardinals meets again, and again, the College of the Cardinals is the group of people that pick a pope, then it becomes very interesting as to who they're going to pick. And when the College of the Cardinals meet, there was a lot of fear from the Cardinals that they might elect another French guy. If they elect another French guy, he's going to move back to Avignon. There were even riots outside what we call the conclave, where they pick who the Pope's going to be, chants of a Roman Pope or at least an Italian, right? They did not want another French guy. And so what ended up happening in 1378, they in fact did pick an Italian, Urban VI, to become the Pope. It didn't take long for some people not to like him. There were some various political reasons and so forth, but also, there were folks who simply were not happy of having another Italian live in Rome. Some people still wanted the cardinals to live in France. And so in 1378, the same year, there were like 13 cardinals who dissented. They left Rome and they basically picked a guy named Clement VII to be the Pope. And so all of a sudden, in 1378, you have two popes. One pope living in Avignon, one pope living in Rome. And it becomes very political, right? And it makes sense, right? This is like there's the 100 Years' War going on at this time. So you have England and France at a big war. So if France supports Clement, England is going to support Urban. If England supports Urban, Scotland is going to support Clement. So you got half of Europe supporting one pope, half of Europe supporting another pope, each pope excommunicating the other pope. It's a mess. And the map I'm using is also a map, if you recognize it, of the Black Death, the spread of the Black Death. So keep in mind, you got half of Europe dying, or almost half of Europe dying, at the same time the church is bickering on who should be the pope. That's not going to go over too well. So, anyways, this goes on to 1409. There's a big meeting called the Council of Pisa. They go, hey, we got to figure this out. And they end up picking a different person named Alexander V. And the idea is Alexander V will displace the other two. The problem is the other two didn't want to go. And so what you ended up with is three popes at the same time. And so you had one pope in Avignon, one pope in Pisa, one pope in Rome, and it was a real mess. And so then what happens is you have the Council of Constance, and the Council of Constance, which goes on and off for about 4 years, they finally picked a guy named Martin V, and they say, Martin V, you're the Pope, and everybody at that point finally agreed to leave. But as I said, the damage was already done, right? You got, the Black Death hits, the church, people go to the church, hey, church, why is everyone dying? Church goes, oh, no, they can't explain it. You've got, the Great Schism happening at the same time. There's a lot of corruption issues. I have a whole lecture on the Protestant Reformation, and I'll leave the link here. You can watch it. But, if you think of why the Protestant Reformation happened, this kind of helps trigger it, folks, right? I mean, you got the church looking bad, you got the Black Death, and you have all the corruption issues, and the damage was very much done to the Catholic Church. So that's a quick story of when you had not just two, but eventually three popes at the same time. Again, sometimes we call this the Great Schism. So anyways, I thought I'd make something quick here for everyone to watch, enjoy, and learn. Please share with others, leave comments, and happy learning, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that. All right, everyone, have a great day.